Hi, my name is Jack McLean and I'm the founder of Prepare Like a Pro. Growing up, I loved playing cricket and football and had a strong passion for helping others. Over the past 11 years working in the industry, I've been lucky enough to have worked alongside Sean Murphy, the head strength and conditioning coach at Essendon, Luke Boyd, physical performance manager at Hawthorn, and interned under Andrew Russell, high performance director at Carlton. I started Prepare Like a Pro after my time as a strength and conditioning coach at Hawthorn Football Club to help developing footballers gain a competitive edge with AFL standard preparation methods. If you're a developing footballer wanting to take your game to the next level, we'd love to help you. At Prepare Like a Pro, you can expect to not only improve your athleticism, but also lower your risk of injury or overload. There are training programs suitable for every level of involvement. I would love to help you choose the one that best suits your goals and personal motivation. Head to our Inquire Now page and I'll get back to you soon. Welcome back to the Prepare Like a Pro podcast. This week on the show we have Steve Gravinia, the physio at the West Coast Eagles, and has been for the last 8 years. Prior to working in the AFL, Steve worked in a clinic called Body Logic as a physiotherapist. And before we start episode 68, the Prepare Like a Pro podcast mission is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Really looking forward to this chat with Steve. I was lucky enough to meet him while West Coast were doing some training in Melbourne, and I got a real sense for his passion, both in physio, but also the strength and conditioning side. We had some great discussions around gymnastics and some of the philosophies that he has. So tune in, guys. If you've got any questions, be sure to send them through in the chat box. And we've got Troy, our Academy member as well, jumping on in about half an hour or so to ask a couple of questions as well. So here we go. How we going, Steve? Thanks for coming
Jack.
on, mate.
Thanks for having me, mate.
We'll dive right into the beginning of your career. At what age did you discover you had a passion for being a physiotherapist?
So I grew up in Melbourne, and like most kids in suburban Melbourne, had a passion for sport as a kid, playing typical sort of footy, cricket, basketball, type team sports. Went through school and then into uni and studied exercise science. And probably got about halfway through that sort of degree and realised that it wasn't going to land me a direct job, and it was a little bit before the time of the exercise physiologist occupation was around. So looked into physiotherapy. I found out you could basically do a Masters of Physio in 2 years, but Melbourne was the only city that didn't offer it. So I applied around the country, and Perth was the uni that I got into over at Curtin. So packed up my bags as a 20-year-old and headed west. Did the degree and got a lot out of it, and always just thought Perth was going to be a 2-year stopover and then get back to Melbourne, which is where I went. Came back home and started a couple of jobs as a graduate physio. I was lucky enough to work under Bruce Connor at Windy Hill. I think you might have had him on the show early days.
Yeah, I know Brucey well.
Yeah, so I had a really fun and enlightening year under him. But at that time, I actually got to the point where I realised the grass was a bit greener over in Perth for me, and the old story of meeting the girl when you go away. So I met my now wife when I was studying, and we decided to make a life for us in Perth. So came back over here, and then basically, I did, and then started the climb through the ranks, and was involved in private practice physio and amateur football, then into the WA Footy League system over here. Was the state under 18s and 16s physio for a few years, and then an opportunity came up at West Coast, and And 8 years later, here we are.
It all worked out very well.
Yeah,
Well played.
yeah, definitely.
Awesome, mate. So you went. So you did your masters in Perth, and you sort of got a taste of the lifestyle there, and met your now wife. And then, how long did you come back to Melbourne and work with Bruce? And how did you make that connection with Bruce for the developing sort of physios that are tuning in and wanting to work up the ranks?
Yeah, well, I mean, sport was always my passion, and sports physio was the direction I thought I'd always want to go. About halfway through the degree over here in Perth, I knew I wanted to go home to Melbourne. I'd actually done a little prac at West Coast, and so made some connections with the physios there. And when I decided I wanted to go home, I basically reached out to those guys, and they gave me the list of every physio in the AFL and all their email addresses. So I basically I emailed every club to try and get a gig somewhere. And I mean, obviously, not many clubs want to take on a new grad, but Bruce had his clinic on the side and was willing to take me on. And so I worked there for a year, and I also worked with some guys who were at the Saints at the time as well, down in Cheltenham, which was close to where I grew up in Sandringham. So I was based out there. But it was about a year or so, and then made the decision to come back to Perth.
And the connection with the Saints guys was originated from that email, the cold emailing.
Yeah. So I was really, really fortunate that a few people that sort of responded in the way that they did, and were able to help me out. So I guess for any young physios, it's expose yourself as much as you can through the junior ranks, and then just throw a few lines out there. You never know which ones will stick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great lesson right there to like you said, put yourself out there. And what do you think you would have done if you got absolutely zero back?
I had that in mind as well. I was coming back. I was playing footy as well at the time, so I was coming back to have another crack in the VFL back at Sandringham. Okay. And the physio clinic that looked after the Sandy Footy Club at the time, I knew a few guys in there, so that was my sort of plan B if things didn't work out. But I mean, I think it was always just get involved with a group that has exposure to team sports, which was sort of my background. And I guess I thought at the time that my point of difference would have been that I played a bit of footy, so I can understand what the guys are going through, and as a keen sort of new grad physio, can sort of bring something to the table.
Absolutely. And so you played football at a high level. Why did you choose not to go down the coaching route? You mentioned the exercise science. So why physio? Why was that something that you wanted to pursue, particularly going to Perth, the other side of the country? Obviously, it was something you were keen on. So how did you come about making that decision?
Yeah, in the degree that I did in exercise science, that tended to be a fairly generic course at the time, and I sort of liken it to like an arts degree for sporty people, right? Where changed much. So there are a few directions you could have gone. And I was playing footy at the time. Like most footballers, you have a few injuries, and the interactions I had with physios at the time always sort of rated them as pretty good people, and it looked like a pretty good environment to be in. I mean, you get to work in the area that you love, and help people sort of get back to achieving their goals. So it was always something I thought I'd like to do. And then when I saw that it could be done in a couple of years after my degree, I weighed up whether I'd stay in Melbourne and just take on the conventional physio degree, which would have been another 4. But I thought I'd take on a bit of a challenge and head over to WA. Yeah.
And what did you have? You mentioned you wanted to get back to your partner, so that was your priority. But what did you have lined up in Perth at the time, or did you build everything back up from ground zero when you went there?
Yeah, I had to start from scratch because honestly, I didn't think I was coming back to Perth. So I reached out to a couple of old uni mates and who were already working back in Perth. And I basically wanted to get back involved in footy in Perth. So I basically got in touch with a lot of the waffle sort of waffle clubs that had attached physios to them. And there was a sort of a bigger group, Physiotherapy Life Care, which I think is over still in Melbourne. Life Care had a few waffle clubs that they were involved with, and there just happened to be a role at one of the clinics over there that were attached to the Claremont Footy Club, and they had a role with the under-18 team. So went through the process with that and had that lined up by the time I moved back. So sort of fell into a good spot there, and from that position at the Waffle Colts level over here, as it's called, I got some exposure with the state programs because Claremont was quite successful at the time. They won a few flags when I was involved with them. Awesome. So we had quite a few boys go onto the state 18s program and then get drafted. So there were opportunities that came up with the state 18s program, and got involved there. And then a role came up there, so I jumped across and got more heavily involved with that. And then when the West Coast role came up, I was quite fortunate that at the time they'd had a sort of a recent history of drafting kids from WA. So there were 9 or 10 young players at West Coast that I'd actually had a fair bit to do with. At Claremont and with the 18s. So it sort of made the transition quite easy that I had a bit of a relationship with a third of the group straight away.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was sort of a bit fortuitous to keep going upwards in those stepping stones.
Yeah, you definitely did a good job of creating plenty of opportunity for yourself. It sounded like it was, decisions you made, almost gut feelings and through your connections, but was obviously playing high-level football and you knew your passion in the game. That's why you decided to do the Masters. So you had a vision to get in AFL, like all the way through when you decided to do your Masters, or did that just sort of eventuate as you got your progressions and got closer to it?
I always thought, that's the pinnacle of working in sport, is to get to the sort of the highest level and have some exposure there. I was very conscious, though, not to rush into it and to get experience at the lower levels where you had a bit of autonomy, and you could actually make some calls and develop your skills. So working from amateur footy into the Waffle program, and then with the 18s program, I got a pretty good grounding where I was able to sort of run the whole program as the sort of the lead medical provider. And in a few of those years, because a lot of the sort of semi-elite programs that were under-resourced, I actually had roles in strength conditioning as well. So I got a pretty wide exposure there. And on top of that, because you're a bit of a one-man band, you're dealing with coaches, you're dealing with parents, you're dealing with doctors, and your communication skills, your ability to deal with players, to deal with people's injuries and their letdowns in life, and also their ability to get back and achieve goals. That was invaluable. So then when I got the opportunity at West Coast, I felt like I'd had a fairly good grounding in that sort of decision-making process. That's
so there's a couple of points there for a physio that's sort of listening in and be like, oh, how good's this? And they've probably got their notebook out and they're writing down some things. So it sounds like building strong relationships with people in the industry was important for you to get opportunity. And then when you got your opportunity, you didn't get too ahead of yourself. You focused on making sure you did a really good job in that role and made yourself really useful at the club, whether it be doing S&C stuff, building relationships with coaches, like you mentioned, parents even. Was that something that came naturally to you, or did a mentor say, look, if you want to get to the top, this is the way you need to go. You need to go above and beyond, or take us through sort of your mindset?
Yeah, actually, I remember a interview, an old podcast sort of quite a few years ago with Jeff Boyle, who was the sort of long-term Fremantle head physio. So he was there from the get-go in '95, I think, and just finished up at the end of last year. And he made a really interesting point about when you are developing as a sports physio, before you get to that professional level, work at that junior level or semi-elite level, make all your mistakes there, test the boundaries, get your exposure of knowing how far you can push someone, what's not enough, make your mistakes. And so then you've got a pretty good understanding and battery of sort of options when you get to the next level. And so, yeah, when I was at working with the Claremont, the Colt, it's obviously still high-level footy, but you've got your ability to experiment a little bit with, say, a hammy rehab program. And because you're doing that, you're a bit of a one-man show doing the S&C, the sports science, the physio, talking to the coaches. You've got a fair bit of autonomy with how you want to set that program up. And you've got really good autonomy around what they're doing on the field, what they're doing in the gym, what they're doing at home, what they're doing with their school, what they're doing with other activities outside of footy, and have that sort of total player management background before you get to that elite level, has proved to be really valuable. Yeah.
And do you think, so because you had that experience and that development, was your transition as you hoped? It was, you felt more comfortable. You had, like you said, you knew a third of the club. Do you feel like that set you up for success for your first couple of years?
Yeah, I think so. I think
you had a good stint at it.
Yeah, I think it makes you a bit of a jack of all trades and sort of had a bit of experience in a lot of different things. You get to that higher level, and now the industry has turned to becoming fairly specialised. I mean, pre-COVID, our high performance department had up to sort of 14 full-time people, where you've got 2 or 3 guys in sports science, 3 or 4 in strength conditioning, 3 full-time physios, a couple of part-time docs, podiatry, hand therapy, medical admin services. And so I obviously was nowhere near the level of any of them, but I could probably carry a conversation with all of them because I'd done a little bit of everything.
Yep.
And then you come in as I was the junior physio of the 3-man physio team, and you don't have a hell of a lot of responsibility with dealing with the head coach, but you're in a position where you can start to make decisions based on all the interactions you're having with all the other staff, and growing from there into that role.
Yeah, and football is very much a place where if there's an opportunity there and someone puts their hands up, you can sort of build a role and get used in areas that aren't classic for what the degree teaches you.
Yep.
Did you find, because you played the game, you understand from the player's point of view, you've been exposed at other areas during that development phase, like you mentioned, did you do things potentially outside of what a classic physio would do if they only had degree experience?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was getting involved in training and being an extra number, designing rehab programs around a player's specific role and having that knowledge of what you need to be able to do at a stoppage, if you're coming back from a shoulder injury, all of those sorts of things, your ability to see the game 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of what's happening at this particular moment. So designing rehab programs around that is a real critical one, but also being involved with the playing group as a training extra, where they'd normally have the coaches running around there as well, I think gives you a better appreciation of the direction the game's going, because I obviously never played footy at that highest level and was never anywhere near that space, but it's a very different game to the sort of footy that I'd come from. So learning the demands of the game through a bit of exposure at a limited degree was really beneficial.
And what about from a relationship point of view? Do you think that helped accelerate your connections with the players?
You always get a bit of street cred if you hit a target or something like that. But you got to be pretty careful not to run into too many people, and you don't want the physio injuring people either. So tiptoe around a few things.
Yeah.
But it was good. You can you definitely develop relationships through experience. And another one of that Jeff Boyle podcast that I remember he said, it was talking about making sure you walk the walk. So if you're prescribing something, whether it's in the gym or out on the field, make sure you can do it or you've had exposure to it before. So again, jumping into the gym with the boys and actually being able to have an appreciation of what they're doing. Obviously, you're never going to lift as much or as fast as them, but just to show them that you sort of know what you're talking about with what you're going to prescribe, it definitely enhances the relationship between the two of you.
Yeah. Have you run into Jeff Boyle?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. I actually haven't mentioned this though. I ran into him when the Cats beat us by 100 points a few weeks ago down there, and first time he's beaten West Coast in 20 years. So he was up and about. But I need to yeah, I do need to give him the credit for inspiring me at the time.
Yeah. Can you remember the podcast? Who was
It was it was a Physio Edge podcast from memory,
Okay.
and it was I reckon I was it must have been young grad physio, so it would have been a sort of late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
love that. I'll try and do a bit of research, see if I can find it. I'll chuck it in the show notes. Get a rebirth.
Yeah, definitely. I'll see if I can track it down for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Other mentors or influences that help shape your career? You sound like you're pretty self-driven, but
yeah, absolutely. From a physio point of view, when I came back over here, a couple of years into my career, I got the opportunity to work at Body Logic Physiotherapy, and the owner of that clinic is Peter O'Sullivan, who is quite well regarded in the management of sort of low back pain and chronic pain. Very, very well researched around the world, really. And sort of being one of the pioneers around the biopsychosocial approach to sort of pain management. So not just looking at the injury, but looking at the person and the context around their issue. So, they've tweaked their back or their knee or their hip, but having understanding of the social context around that and their psychological state at the time, how much stress are they under, what's going on at home, are they in a contractual debate at the moment and under the pump in that space, what's their background in terms of their belief system around back pain. Maybe their dad's had a dodgy disc and has been telling him since he was a kid that his back's cooked and you shouldn't be bending over, and all of those things feed in to the situation. So just taking a step back and appreciating the person, the situation, the environment, not just the injury. That was a big learning lesson for me under Pete, and that's something I've been able to sort of carry through. In the sporting world, we get very biomedically focused, I think, when we just look at a scan and look at an injury and think, oh, it's a hammy, that's 3 weeks. But there's bigger fish around there as well to take a look at, and just not forgetting that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So in the clinic, you potentially or usually you'll have a bit more time than you do with the athletes in elite sport. How did you go about transferring that, thorough interview process and getting that sort of information? Did you just sort of condense your amount of questions, or is it hallway conversations?
It is hard. It is hard. It's quite a unique environment though, where you're practically with these guys full time. And although you might not get the one-on-one time in a room, getting deep and meaningful with them, the amount of little chats that you do have with guys, you've got a pretty good idea of what's going on in their lives. And if you don't, if there's an issue going on, we're quite collaborative with. If it's not obviously too personal or confidential, we're able to get some information from, say, a development coach or the S&C guys, or if anyone else has had any interactions with the guys, if there's something going on, we're generally able to get a bit more info and get a bit more context around it. But again, if there's an issue and sometimes it just doesn't fit, we've got the capacity to get them into a sort of more private setting and have a deeper conversation if we need to.
And for those tuning in that are not confused, but they're trying to look for answers around what you mean by it's not just simply a physical thing. There's a mental lifestyle and the psychosocial element that you talked about. Take us through, I guess, in layman's terms, on what you mean by that and how holistic it sort of can be when an injury occurs.
Yeah, so I mean, there's an injury which will occur at the tissue level. Sometimes it doesn't, but just if we can imagine an injury has occurred at a tissue level, say a sprained ankle. The ligament that will be damaged has got pain fibers that will shoot a message up to the spinal cord, which will get up to the brain, and then you're basically in that cortex level making sense of the information that's coming to you. So it's not just I've sprained my ankle. It's basically I'm getting information from that ankle, and then it's chucking it into a melting pot of prior experiences, beliefs, social context, and then it comes to an answer and goes, okay, well, that's just a sprained ankle. and it goes down, and that'll start the inflammatory process. Sometimes, though, you might find that your whole body is, if you use the analogy of an amplifier turned right up, that can be that you're already in a state of high stress. So you might have had an average night's sleep last night. You might have had a fight with your wife, and you are at a state where your tolerance to pain might be well down. Your reaction to pain might go right up. So what might be a minor injury could be amplified significantly by the state that your body's in right now. And if you are able to dampen all of that and get to the crux of what else is going on around your life, you might be able to get on top of a lot of the background noise around that pain issue. Obviously, there's probably a tissue pathology thing going on which needs healing, and we need to respect that and recondition it appropriately. But if there's other things going on in someone's life, it's really important to address that, because if you don't, then it can become a vicious cycle and turn into either a chronic sort of pain issue or a recurrent issue, or something that it's likely to creep up again in your life down the track.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that explanation. That's love that. In your experience, when dealing with players that maybe are around 25 years plus, how much is the psychosocial something you're aware of when you're working with an athlete that's just broken down with an injury?
It's significant. I've been, I'm 36 with a couple of young kids, and I've been fortunate to have my last sort of 5 or 6 years with a lot of guys that have had kids around the same time of players. We've got a bit of an older list, so we've got quite a lot of young dads at the club. So I can really empathise what they're going through. Like, some guys aren't sleeping for weeks with young kids, and without doubt that impacts their physiology, their psychology, their readiness to train, their risk of injury. And a lot of the time, if an injury or a recurrent injury does occur, you dig a little deeper in what's going on in the background, and there's currently things at play.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, if there was a player that you just have such confidence that this injury would normally be a 2-weeker, but this guy's put his hand up to play, he's committed to play, and medical team, like, he's got a proven record that when he puts his hand up, he gets a pretty good result. How much do you back the clinical side and assessment, and then how much do you give the player a bit of ownership on?
The longer I've been in this industry, the more I value the senior player's opinion. I've learned to know they know their bodies pretty well. Guys that have shown to be able to play under duress, play with certain pathology, if they feel confident and if they've proved to themselves that they can perform, they're generally up for it, and you're willing to back them in. There's obviously an acknowledgement of risk, right?
Yeah.
So, and you've got to put all that on the table. But if you don't, I think you always have to put the player's opinion and thoughts at the forefront when you're making a decision. And so it's not just the doc and the physio making the call. You need their input, because you're going to get a lot more buy-in if you back them in. They'll be more open and honest with you as well. Yeah,
awesome.
And on the flip side as well, like, a couple of nights ago we had a Monday night game, and we had a guy that said, "No, I don't think I've got a little hammy, and I don't think I can go." We could test him, and he was actually pretty good, but he in himself said, "Oh, nah, this won't survive." So we backed him in.
Yeah. So backed him in as in you gave him a little bit of extra time because he didn't feel ready, sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. So that's So there's a fair bit of two-way conversation going on throughout the return to play process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on the flip side, for the developing footballers listening, how do they go about making that decision and having that discussion with their physio at the footy club? If they disagree with the physio and they're hearing this and they're thinking, oh, well, at the AFL level, they've got to, they listen to their players. What is the best way for players to communicate to the medical team? And how would you advise, like, players to, if the medical practitioner said, look, it's our duty of care. We think you need an extra week. How do you think they should respond to that as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting and really important. I think it's really important for a player of any age, especially a younger player, to be inquisitive and to actually take genuine interest, and to ask as many questions as possible and get clarity in their own mind. Because a lot of the time you hear of players walk out of the doc's room or the physio's office and someone will say, "Well, how'd you go? What'd they say?" And you're like, "Oh, yeah, don't know. They just said I'm out." Having clarity for yourself, because you're going to get bombarded with tons of questions from your parents and your mates and your manager and whoever else about what's going on. Take a real active approach to it. Make sure you know exactly what's going on, why the medical team is advising one way or the other, based on what evidence have they got for it, what's the relative risk of going the other way, what's the potential longer-term health consequences, what's my chance of getting through, but also what's my chance of performing. And they're two very different questions. Yeah, I might be able to get through this game. I've got a tight quaddie, but am I going to be able to perform to my optimal? And am I going to be compromising the team's outcome as well? Yep. If I go in there, I can be the brave soldier who puts his hand up, but there's no point if I last half a game or if I don't get a kick because I can't run around. So there's a fair bit to it. But
absolutely.
Open and honest conversation and having real clarity on what's going on, I think makes for a better relationship between the staff and the players. Yeah,
and ultimately, it sounds like that the best approach is an informed approach where everyone is being open and honest and addressing what their beliefs are and backing it up with reasons, and then coming to a collected decision at the end of the day that not everyone agrees, but they can understand why the decision is the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about you go, mate.
And I was just going to say, and a lot of the time that's not necessarily just face-to-face dialogue. Like some people might need a diagram, some people might need a video demo. People learn differently and understand things differently at different levels. So that's the benefit of working so intimately with these guys. You actually start to understand them at the personal level. So you see how well they receive information and feedback and through what form and what media. So that's also a benefit.
And that I guess ties in with what you were talking about before. Like you may have communicated very clearly to the player, but because it was all audio and it wasn't kinesthetic or it wasn't visual, you weren't speaking their language. So they walk away from that meeting. You feel like you did a good job, but actually it just all went. All they know is they're not playing, like you said.
Yep, absolutely.
So the art of communication, which is something that popped up earlier, you talked about with dealing with coaches and players and getting the experience early days. You build that.
Yep.
Awesome. Doubt. Love it, mate. What about challenges in your career that, when you look back at them, that were massive growth periods for you as a practitioner?
A few challenges along the way. I got to a point. I'd done a master's in sports physio. I'd done a fair bit of sort of physiotherapy, sort of professional development, and I was getting to a point where I was feeling as though I needed to sort of become a bit more well-rounded in different areas. And so I went along to a workshop by Ido Portal, who is sort of reached sort of notoriety around the world with his sort of movement practice work, and done a lot of work with sort of MMA guys and Conor McGregor and all those kind of guys. I did a couple of workshops with him sort of 2012, 2013 and 14, and he really opened my eyes to sort of a greater sort of world around sort of the movement culture and movement space and physical culture, which just taught me to not be so insular in just physiotherapy profession and football, and start to look out to other sports, other practices, other cultures, and see how much you can learn. Mm-hmm. And I guess making real world examples on that. going into the gymnastics space for strength and mobility work, going into the martial arts world, particularly things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for awareness on the ground and comforting in sort of grappling and that sort of intimate contact of tackling on the floor. Some aerial acrobatic work about falling from heights. All of those sorts of things which have direct application to AFL football, which I had just no exposure or awareness of prior to that. And so some of the great learnings that I've had in the past sort of 10 years has really been chatting, practicing, involving myself in some of those worlds and taking some of that to the AFL world and experimenting and seeing some really good results. So that's been a really good outcome of a sort of an earlier challenge.
Yeah, and how did you? It's not something I've heard in the AFL ranks. Ido Patel's name pop up in my time, which was only a short stint, but certainly in working in CrossFit gyms and weightlifters and things like that in the fitness industry, he's a big household name. How did you come across it? Was it those in the clinical world, or was it something that was going on at the West Coast where physio practitioner?
No. It was basically I was at a physio course by a guy. His name was Bruce Rawson, who's over in Queensland. He mentioned the functional movement screen, which I'd never heard of back when it was really early days in that space. So I started looking down that line, and that sort of led me to looking and exposing myself to different areas in the US and what was going on with the FMS guys and Callie Starrett, Gray Cook, all of those guys in sort of different sort of movement disciplines. And it was through that I stumbled across this Ido Patel doing some really crazy hand balancing work and contorting his body. And
he's an impressive human.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought he was a freak of nature, really. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then I saw he was coming to Perth and just had a bit of a deeper dive into it and just saw something in it that we were going through some issues with a few sort of shoulder rehab programs, just trying to find a few different options and opportunities. And I ended up going to the workshop and just seeing some of the high-level stuff that they were doing, but then showing us how you take a few steps back and go back to really basic activation and mobility drills to start preparing for that and then building back up. I saw some really good stuff in that area. And then, took it to some of the later stage rehab work that we were doing with some of our guys and started playing around on the Olympic rings and with some handstand work and hand balancing and had great results. And then from there, started looking at how we could implement it into the whole group. And in a sort of a time-pressured industry that we're in, you got to make sure you get some pretty good bang for your buck with what you're doing. So looking at some loaded mobility work that we were able to do off the back of some of those drills, we were able to put it into some of the sort of pre-season injury prevention programs for some subgroups, and then ended up putting it in with the whole group and had some really good buy-in.
Yeah. Okay. So, there's a fair bit to unpack there. It takes courage to do things differently in the AFL and bring this in. So take us through. You're convinced, okay, this feels pretty good on my body. I've tried it out and it feels effective. I can see it's transferred to the game. How did you then sell it to the club and the medical team, high-performance team, that this is something we're going to try with? And then from there, it sounds like you did it in the rehab space, got a good result, and then am I right in thinking that, okay, if this worked for these guys to get return to play, why isn't it part of our general philosophy for the group?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was the freak show for about 6 months or so in the gym when people were looking at me and asking me what I was doing.
You're following the online program. It's pretty committed as well, like time-wise.
Yeah, I had a good crack at it, and it probably came at the time I was we were just before having kids. So it came at the right time where I could actually commit a few hours a day to it. And really enjoyed it, and really enjoyed how it made sort of my body feel and the freedom that I had. I was never a flexible guy, but sort of the change that it made was really significant. And then Yeah, the
And you did
first.
that at the club, sorry? Like the
Yeah, I was
athletes
doing it.
saw
Yeah,
that and...
yeah, doing it at the club. Yeah,
Brought
yeah.
in rings, or there was already some rings?
I brought some rings in. Brought in my
Okay.
own rings. I was trying to do it
Wow.
after hours. I'm not really one to put myself out there too much, but yeah, a few people caught the eye. And then, yeah, implemented it with one or two rehabbers. And at the time, they were quite senior guys. And they were a bit more open-minded than, I guess, your conventional run-of-the-mill footballer who wants to do bench and buys. So they took to it, and, yeah, they were really, really blown away by the change it could make. And then the carryover it had back to the conventional gym as well, making them a little bit more robust with more range of movement and a bit stronger through range. And so when a few senior guys start doing it, and then people start noticing that as part of their general program, people become a bit more inquisitive. And from there, it just started to spiral. And then I had people coming to me asking to try out a few of these things, and had to be pretty careful not just to let guys jump straight into some of the higher end things that they see on YouTube. So we had to put a few things in place to make sure everyone started small, and certain guys just are never going to be able to do it due to past injuries and things like that. But yeah, we had a lot of guys doing just basic hanging work and building up from there, and then some basic floor-based routines and spinal movements and hand balancing work. And yeah, it's become a bit of a mainstay in the program now over the past sort of 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, and 6, 7 years, that's amazing. So yes, it stood the test of time. During that sort of 6 to 7 years, have you sort of refined the methods to transfer it to more AFL appropriate? Like you mentioned, some guys with shoulder issues, or maybe wrist issues that don't partake. But what about the guys that do? How is it different to what you see on YouTube, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of floor-based work in terms of mobility crawls, rolling, some sort of rolling and tackle technique work. And obviously back in the day, we'd do a little bit more sort of floor-based mobility and stretching, whereas we found this is a bit of both. So you're getting a bit more bang for your buck in terms of efficiency. A lot of the guys are all about getting in and out these days at the club. So if you can throw in a drill where they're crawling through range and you're actually getting some good hip mobility work as well as upper body weight bearing proprio work all in the one exercise, it transfers pretty well, and that's become part of our sort of pre-training routine. And then some of the work in the gym space around the rings and being able to do some techniques on the rings and go through full range of movement into full loaded shoulder extension, using that as sort of a selling point to help enhance sort of shoulder extension through sprinting technique, and transfer it onto the field, has also been a good selling point. So there's a few ways we can touch on it. Yeah.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, and good on you for thinking laterally and giving it a go yourself, and then rehab, and then getting a good result into the strength, the main program. So yeah, that's awesome to hear, especially things done a little bit differently as well, which is fascinating stuff. We're going to have a quick little drink break, guys. This is a short video about the academy, and then we've got one of our academy members, Troy Jones, who's a strength and conditioning coach. That's pretty keen to ask you a couple of questions, Steve. So about 2 minutes to have a little break, guys. So stick around. We've not long left.
Hi, I'm Jack McLean, an AFL football strength and conditioning coach, and I want to introduce you to the Prepare Like a Pro Academy. Our academy is a subscription-based platform where you can sign up to be a part of our community. If you get to the end of each episode of the podcast and are hungry for more, this is for you. Designed for aspiring AFL athletes and staff, you'll receive heaps of bonus weekly content, learn who the guests are in advance, and submit questions. Access to our Facebook group with Jack and other Prepare Like a Pro coaches. You'll be able to receive merchandise, program discounts and freebies, and get free access to our live events, exercise technique database, and much more. This is a great way for you to support the podcast, and it helps me with production and release of epic content for you guys each week. Your contribution goes a long way in making the Prepare Like a Pro community possible. For a small monthly fee, you'll have access to all of the special content released on our Academy forums. There's no lock-in and you can cancel absolutely anytime.
Okay, welcome back, guys. We're going to bring Troy Jones on now to ask Steve some questions. So welcome on, Troy. Thanks for joining us. I'll put you on the main floor. There you go, mate. How you going? Oh, I think you're on mute. Have I put you on mute? No.
No, there, you hear me?
Oh, there you are. We got you. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me today.
Of course, mate. Good to have you on. You asked the guys the other night or last week some ripping questions, mate. So I think you'll take my job soon.
No, never.
I'll handball it over to you. All yours, Troy.
Awesome. Hey, Steve, how are you?
Good, thanks, Troy.
Look, I believe you're also part of the ATG network. That
I am.
Yeah, I've been following you and some of your posts on there that I've really sort of enjoyed. So I'm aspiring to be a strength and conditioning coach in AFL. I'm actually part of an affiliate club, the East Coast Eagles in Sydney, and hoping to work with them. I was going to see if you've been able to incorporate any of the ATG principles with West Coast. I know you've sort of spoken about a lot of gymnastics and handstand work, some loaded mobility, which I know Keegs was doing in his time with the Roosters. Have you been able to implement much of the ATG specific stuff with West Coast in your time there?
Yeah, so I came across. I've sort of known of Keegan for 6 or 7 years with a lot of the sort of common interests that we had, and then exposed to sort of Ben Patrick's work about 12 months ago, and then got involved to sort of see what it was like from a personal point of view, and went through the early sort of zero and dense programs and found it really beneficial. So started using it a little bit with the guys, particularly some lower limb rehab guys. I really like the method of sort of from the ground up reconditioning. So the things like the tibialis raises is something which is really lost in a lot of the early stage rehab work in the physio and S&C world from what I've seen. And so the anterior chain work that they do, I think, is really beneficial. And on top of that, the strength through range, I guess, is the term which I'd be a big advocate for. So the way they do their split squats and get sort of full range of movement through hip, knee, ankle in both directions is something that we've been involved with. So yeah, we use routinely their sort of tib raise work, their split squat work. We do backward sleds work for sort of concentric conditioning of the quads. And I haven't put anyone through like the structured programming, just through obviously time demands and competing interests around these guys' programs. But yeah, bought in to a lot of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know. So I've played for the last 4 years. I've been a big fan of Keegs, and I've been implementing that stuff in my own like sort of game and my training, and I've been fortunate enough to never miss a game in 4 years, and I attribute a lot of it to Ben and Keegan and all the injury prevention stuff. So if I'm fortunate enough to work with the club, I'm really hoping to incorporate a lot of like what you've said, so building from the ground up, developing like athletic range and a lot of lower limb sort of work. If I'm working with this club, for instance, our guys aren't professional athletes, they're not spending time in the gym and as much time on recovery. Do you have any advice for, trying to get the best bang for your buck? So working with a big group who, they're working 9 to 5 and just getting to training on time.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some of these drills could be used as part of the warm up, without doubt. So some pre-training activation work through the lower limb is a really good option. And then post-training body weight conditioning, particularly hamstring strength work, so some of the Nordic work that they do. easily something you could all get the guys to just do some partner Nordics, helping holding onto each other's ankles and doing some reconditioning at the end of training. And then then it becomes a bit about the buy-in. So what the culture's like around their gym and strength conditioning work outside of on-field training. So if there is dedicated time for that, working out how to implement some of that programming, or if the guys are self-motivated enough to do it outside of training time in their own time, then it's about programming when it's appropriate to do that. So you might not be doing your heavy Nordics on a Friday night before a game, but it's just using your SSC principles to work out when and how. But there's certainly opportunities to incorporate it into the programming.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's really helpful. In terms of, so I know, we're a really good club. There's a lot of positives, but we don't have any like training facilities in terms of a gym. I know they're in the midst of trying to sort of tee up a partnership with local gyms. If we had a really minimal budget, what do you reckon, or what would you recommend as some of the key sort of equipment to include?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, a lot of in my opinion, for that level of football, from an upper body point of view, the work that I've seen in the gymnastics world, apart from a chin-up bar and a set of rings, you can scale upper body strength to any level you like, really. So I can appreciate that you're not pushing the heavy weights on the bench or with dumbbells, but if you're getting guys building up to one arm strength work in pushing, I think that's suffice in the football world, and with the pulling base work as well, like building up towards sort of one arm chin kind of work as well. So I don't think you need too many, too much of an equipment arsenal for upper body. And from lower body, I still think the barbell's probably king. And so if you've got barbell or an ability to have a squat rack, I think from there you've got lots of things. If not, even any kind of weighted work like a kettlebell becomes very multi-purpose in that space. From a hamstring conditioning point of view, I think the Nordic exercise where you've got partners is equipment free. Hip extension, glute ham raise, those kind of things are a nice adjunct as well. But again, not insurmountable. If you've got a bench, or if you've got a fit ball and you've got someone to hold onto their legs, you've got those apparatus as well to work through those options. So I think you can do it minimally if you need to. But yeah, I think in an ideal world, there is an ability to do a squat rack and be able to rack some heavy weight. But if not, there's plenty of options.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. To sort of continue with that one again, focusing on, not having quite a big budget for strength and conditioning at the moment. Do you have any like recovery protocols that you'd really recommend for like post-training, post-game, the next day?
Yeah. I think sleep is king. So if you've got nothing else, just make sure they're getting home and getting into a well-rested state, and getting the best sleep possible. Outside of that, nutrition is probably number 2. So education around their eating habits and choices, pre-post training, whether they're periodizing their carb intake on low training days, things like that. I think that's all an added bonus. But good sound nutrition, education and advice is probably as important as anything else. So once you've got sleep and nutrition down pat, then you can start looking at some other things. Cold exposure for recovery, I think more often than not, people are saying it is beneficial, whether that's individual, cold versus heat. By and by, I think it's individual preference. But yeah, cold exposure and sauna-based work are really handy. But again, I think a lot of that's going to come down to whether the players have got the resources available to get into those sort of spaces. So if you live near the coast and it's a colder climate, you've got the beach. If you've got an ability to get into an ice bath somewhere, or if you've got access to a sauna, they're probably the next ones. And yeah, you can keep going in terms of recovery tools around compression and other electrical stimulation devices. But I think you've got to get the big rocks right in terms of sleep, nutrition, and then go from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know it's always been, I've been a bit OCD about, making sure I'm getting at least 8 hours and trying to stay on top of that, which again probably helps with staying on the field as long as I've been able to, which is cool.
Yep.
Last one from me. Do you guys incorporate priming sessions before games? I know it's a bit tough for me. Like, I've seen a lot of research that suggests, like the morning of a game, getting a priming session in, because I'm playing in like the lower grades. I tend to have the early game, so I try to do it, late afternoon the day before. But there seems to be a lot of benefits to priming sessions, but I'm not sure, because AFL is such a taxing sport. Is that something you guys include or incorporate at West Coast?
Yeah, it's not. It's not. And it's probably the biggest reason for us is that we're a travelling team. And so every second week we're on a long haul flight. Unless it's Adelaide, we're 4+ hours in the air, either 1 or 2 days before the game. So we value sleep number one. And so then if players need to sleep in and stay on Perth time the next day, we'll value that over getting up, getting going with a priming session to stimulate the nervous system and prep them for a game. And then with home games, we basically try and keep routine. So every second week, if we're travelling, we'll just try and keep the same routine back home as well, and not do anything too much in the morning. We had the All Blacks over 2 years ago now, I think, with the Bledisloe Cup in Perth, and had them training with us for a week, and basically so they embedded themselves at the club, which was a really great learning opportunity. And they were big advocates of priming. And we watched a few of the sessions they were doing, which were pretty impressive and intimidating at the time. But yeah, I mean, they were huge raps for it. And I know the rugby culture has a little bit more instilled in that space, which you might be exposed to a little bit more in Sydney. But it's not something we've done. And I haven't heard too many AFL clubs that do it. But yeah, it might be out there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's the sort of thing, like, I never really thought about the travel, especially for you guys. I know the furthest we're sort of traveling for a game each week is an hour and a half at the absolute most. So that might not be as much of an issue. Do you think it's something that if the travel wasn't an issue, like if it was more like a waffle-based team that you're working with, that you guys would potentially incorporate something like that, or you still probably wouldn't?
Yeah, possibly. Again, it might be a team by team sort of analysis on what works. So does the priming make a bigger difference for this group than the fact that we've got 12 blokes with young kids that would rather be home in the morning of a game spending the time with their families, and they're in a better psychological state getting to the game because they've had a happy morning? Maybe they're not as physically prepared because they haven't done the priming session, but their readiness to play might be just as good. Versus a younger team who, could respond really well to it. I probably haven't looked at it enough, to be honest, to look at the real physiological benefits of it and to work out whether it would supersede any of the other variables.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's all been incredible. Thank you so much for your time and going so in depth with all the answers.
No worries, Troy.
Awesome questions, Troy. Thanks for jumping on again, mate. We'll speak soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, mate.
Catch up. Fantastic. Thanks for that, Steve. Really appreciate it. For those that are watching as well that are interested in the academy, click the link in our Instagram bio for some more information. But we'll start to wrap it up, mate. Thanks so much for sharing the last 60 minutes with us and being open and honest all the way through from how you approached it early days when you're studying and travelling to Perth, but also all the experiences you've had up until now and how you go about upskilling yourself as well. It's been super valuable for myself and I'm sure everyone that's listened in. Last question, what are you excited about for 2021? What's on the horizon for you?
Well, the season's wrapping up pretty quickly, hopefully not sooner rather than later. The team in a bit of a precarious position. But I think I'm looking forward to, with the industry the way it's going, I think it's in a really interesting space with the AFLPA and how much time off the players are going to have, and then the overflow of how much time we're going to have to prepare them. And I think what COVID's shown is the shortened pre-season is going to bring different challenges. So I think the clubs that are going to be the most innovative to work out ways to get athletes prepared to battle is going to be really interesting. And then it's, can you prepare them to survive the rigors of the season? Because if that's going to become the new norm, it's going to bring a whole raft of challenges. And then even on top of that, how we manage them in the off season if we're not going to have a lot of exposure to them. Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting time, I think.
Yeah, there's a few whispers, isn't there, of extended time off and pre-season starting in January, and then potentially maybe the culture shifting in the off season, like the American model, where you start having your own prep team and these sort of things. Yeah,
absolutely. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, time will tell. It's good to have things in this climate anyway to be excited for. So
definitely.
That's a nice positive light to wrap it up with. But yeah, thanks so much for jumping on again, Steve. It's been great. We had a good chat in the gym, but it's even better to dive in and go a little bit deeper about your story, mate. So thanks a lot.
No worries, mate. Anytime.
Awesome. All the best for the rest of the season as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, mate. Hopefully everyone in Melbourne is back outside soon.
Fingers crossed. We can follow the Perth success route.
Yeah,
a little bit of that at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, mate.
Awesome, mate. Catch up.
Bye.
All right, Troy. We'll what were your big takeaways from that, mate? Did you take some notes?
Yeah, I've actually reached out. So I mentioned to you before being part of the ATG Sydney and Ben, and in trying to look through the network to see if there was anyone that's incorporated anything in AFL, because it's more American based, but there's a lot of like rugby league trainers out here that do it. So I actually came across Steve early on, and all the stuff that he was sort of posting and commenting on was really, really cool. So I've been to see how he's implemented it with West Coast. So it's really cool seeing a lot of the body weight stuff, the gymnastics, loaded mobility, and a lot of the sort of big beliefs that I have that I want to incorporate with my club. It's really cool to see that he's doing that sort of stuff and finding really good results. Like I found a lot of his psychological stuff really important. So when I was talking about the priming sessions, and he was saying, you know, if a guy's got a young family, like, is he better off spending time with them, or is he better coming to the gym early to get a session in? And I think for me, like not having kids and stuff like that, it's something that's never really crossed my mind. I'm always, you know, probably selfish and thinking, what can I do to be I can for game day? But actually like having that mindset of thinking about, you know, what a player with a young family might be going through, or, you know, what other people that, you know, would rather spend time with friends or have different ways of sort of getting themselves ready. He dives into the psychology sort of stuff really well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That stood out for me as well. You can tell he has a very deliberate approach, and you can see the experience that is sort of in the, you know, helps his decision making and his philosophy. I think being from that player first and experiencing his methods, he's got to feel it first before putting the players through it was a value that kept popping up, which was really cool to see. And I agree, it's not something you hear about all the time. People having the courage to try different things and go outside of the grain, but it's certainly something I noticed with my brief first chat with him that he was doing, and hats off to him. I think the courage to do that and get it, and then back it up with great results, is awesome, and something probably now, like we mentioned now, that last chat, off seasons are going to get shorter, so that people like that do get a little bit creative and are constantly learning and finding new ways to experiment, and rather than just doing the same old stuff, are probably going to prosper.
It's huge. The courage to do something that isn't back. So I'd imagine all his stuff with Ido Portal, you know, there wouldn't have been a ton of like research. There wouldn't have been a ton of papers that would suggest this is best practice. And I think that's sort of what I'm trying to incorporate is a lot of those things that I found good results in myself. I feel so much better doing them. I don't have the research to sort of back it up because it doesn't exist yet, but just because the research doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. So for someone in that sort of position where, I'd imagine it's quite cutthroat because there's so many people wanting a job like that, especially with West Coast, for him to take a risk, try something he's had success with, it's huge. It's awesome. And it's it's a pretty cool feeling for me going forward, I think.
Yeah, I think the other big takeaway for me was how much he put value on time and not rushing into progressed roles, but just doing a really good job with the role that's in front of you that you're currently doing. I think that's a really good message. And I know I was really eager a few years ago to climb the ladder and get the next job all the time, and you can get a little bit distracted and spend too much energy on the future. Where if you focus on more of the now and the role that you're currently doing and doing your best job there, it's definitely going to set you up. So that was a good message coming from him, and he definitely, you could tell with the questions that you had, he could easily adapt his philosophy and apply it to different models, whether due to time. So it goes to show it helps you when you've worked from sort of, I guess, from the bottom all the way up to the elite. So, which is motivating for, I imagine, for someone like yourself that wants to work in elite sport.
Absolutely.
Make the experience you're doing now, it gives you motivation to give it a good crack and take risks as well.
No, it's that one was incredible. I've been a big fan of him for a while, so getting the opportunity to actually speak to him was really cool, and I love what he does, and hopefully there's more people like him in this field moving forward.
Yeah. It's funny how you've jumped on the academy and you did it so quickly, and it sounded like it was the right place for the right time because you wanted Lockie and Jess Spenlove, and then I had no idea that you knew of Steve Gravana's work as well. That's uncanny, mate.
It's incredible. Like, through one of Lockie's, like when you saw Black Lockie really sort of bumping you and found your page, I was like, this is exactly what I like. This sounds awesome. When you mentioned me, I'm like $20 a month and I'm getting to speak and send emails and you don't hear back. Like, there's no hard feelings in that. Like, they're busy people. I'm sure they get it, so much, but, having or getting to go through you and, you having these sort of connections and getting to speak to people has been incredible for me. I mean, I just did much for the strength and conditioning role yesterday, and I've been for
So I think we're getting a bit of a bad reception at the moment. How's that, Troy? Can you hear me? I think the reception just cut out a little bit there, but no, I'm loving the fact you're on board as well, mate. It's awesome to have you on board. You can tell you're really hungry to learn, and you already know a lot as it is now in your career. So it's good to see. Hopefully, you get to apply it at that club that you've presented to, and get that practical experience. It sounds like that's where you're ready for it now, and getting your hands dirty. So thanks again for jumping on tonight as well, mate. Those questions were fantastic, and it added another layer to the episode. And I'll cut that up and put it on the Patreon page as well, so you can review the answers if you missed some note taking.
That'd be really good. Thank you again for letting me jump on.
Of course, mate. Good to have you on. We'll speak soon.
Sounds good, mate. See you later.
Awesome, Troy. Catch up. See you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We have a couple of guests, really exciting guests coming up for next week for Prepare Like a Pro live chats. So if you're interested in tuning in, make sure to follow our Instagram page and we stream all our live chats on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so you can watch it from any of your favourite platforms. They're definitely best viewed on the computer, or if you have YouTube, you can watch it from our YouTube channel as well on your smart TV. So any questions, feel free to direct message us, and until next time.